You remember the killer bee panic? Cheesy 90s specials, tabloid headlines, a swarm from a bee movie supposedly crawling its way toward the US border. Nobody who laughed that off ever checked what happened after the movie ended. Africanized honeybees are established in at least 13 US states right now, and they've been quietly killing people for over a decade. The swarm was never fiction. It just stopped making headlines. Days ago, in a Florida backyard, a family's dog didn't survive an encounter with a hive nobody even knew was there. There's a farmer in Texas whose last phone call was made while tens of thousands of stings were still tracking him across his own field. There's a number sitting quietly in entomology research for exactly how many stings it takes to kill someone your size, and it's a lot closer than you'd think. All three are coming. Start with what actually makes this bee different, because it isn't the venom. Sting for sting, an Africanized honeybee is no more potent than the docile European honeybee, probably nesting somewhere in your own backyard right now. Same chemical, same dose. What changed is the response. Disturb a European hive, and it might send 5 or 10 bees to investigate. Disturb an Africanized one, and it can send hundreds, chasing anything that moves for up to a quarter mile, long after you're sure you've already outrun it. Days ago, in a backyard in Deerfield Beach, Florida, a family's 12-year-old pug named Max wandered too close to a hive nobody in the house knew existed. His owner, Brian de Jesus, wasn't home. By the time anyone realized what was happening, Max had already been stung dozens of times. An inspector who removed the hive afterward believed the colony was Africanized. A lab manager at the University of Florida's Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory explained the mechanism plainly afterward. These bees aren't provoked by much. Sound, movement, vibration, even certain smells can be enough to tip an already agitated colony over the edge. To understand why, you have to go back to 1956 and a decision that had nothing to do with fear at all. A Brazilian geneticist named Warwick Kerr imported queen bees from southern Africa into Brazil, hoping to breed a hardier, more productive strain suited to the tropics. Better honey production for a warmer climate than the European bees already established there could manage. It worked exactly as intended, right up until 1957, when 26 of those African queens escaped captivity and began mating with the wild European population already spread across the continent. The hybrid that resulted kept the productivity Kerr was after. It also kept something else. A defensive intensity from its African ancestry that the European side of its lineage had spent centuries breeding out. The new hybrid spread north at a rate of roughly 200 to 300 miles a year, one of the fastest insect range expansions ever recorded on a continental scale. By some estimates, over 1 trillion individual Africanized bees now exist across Latin America alone, a number researchers themselves describe as conservative. The swarm crossed into the United States near Hidalgo, Texas, in October of 1990. It reached Arizona and New Mexico by 1993, California by 1994, and had established itself east of the Mississippi in Florida by 2005. Today, it's confirmed in at least 13 U.S. states, and climate models suggest it still has room to grow. Researchers project the bees could push into southeastern Oregon, the western Great Plains, and even the southern Appalachians by the middle of this century, as warming winters stop killing off the colonies that push furthest north. Warwick Kerr spent much of the rest of his career defending the experiment and disputing the killer bee label the press had attached to his work, arguing the aggression was being exaggerated relative to the benefits of a hardier honeybee for tropical beekeeping. He wasn't entirely wrong about the benefits. He was still the man whose queens ended up on the other end of every name in this video. The United States wasn't even close to the first place this hybrid caused a body count. For more than 3 decades before that Texas crossing in 1990, Africanized bees had already been spreading through Brazil, Bolivia, Venezuela, and Mexico, and the death toll accumulating behind them was substantial enough that some entomologists estimate the hybrid may have killed as many as 1,000 people across Latin America since Kerr's queens first escaped. a figure researchers themselves treat as a rough, likely conservative estimate, given how many rural deaths in the decades before consistent record-keeping were never formally attributed to a cause. By the time American news networks started running segments on killer bees as a looming curiosity, the swarm they were describing had already been a documented lethal presence one country south for a generation. That history is part of why the fear was so easy to package as entertainment instead of a warning. It had been someone else's problem for 30 years by the time it became America's. There's no way to see any of this coming by looking at one. Africanized honeybees are roughly 10% smaller than their European cousins, and otherwise visually identical. The only reliable way to tell them apart is genetic testing or a specialized measurement process. Some states, including Florida, use specifically for this purpose. The hive in your neighbor's shed could be either kind. Nothing about how it looks will tell you which. What will tell you is the math. Researchers studying sting toxicity estimate that roughly 1,350 stings carries enough venom to kill about half of adults weighing 150 pounds, a number that sounds abstract until you learn Africanized colonies have been documented delivering stings in the thousands within minutes, not the dozens a European hive might manage in the same encounter. And Africanized colonies don't wait for a full season to multiply the number of hives capable of doing that. European colonies swarm, split off to form new colonies once or twice a year. Africanized colonies can swarm up to 17 times in the same period, spreading not just geographically, but numerically at a pace nothing else in American beekeeping has ever had to plan around. Mass stinging isn't the only way this bee kills either, and it's worth separating the two mechanisms clearly. A person with a severe bee allergy can go into fatal anaphylaxis from a single sting, from any honeybee Africanized or not. That risk exists regardless of which bee finds you. What Africanized colonies add is an entirely separate second pathway to the same outcome. Enough cumulative venom, delivered by sheer numbers, to overwhelm even someone with no allergy at all. Most bee sting deaths in America, historically, have been the first kind. A single sting, a severe allergic reaction, gone in minutes. Africanized bees introduced a second kind of fatal encounter that had, before 1990, barely existed in the US at any meaningful scale. Death by volume, not by sensitivity. On July 15, 1993, a 82-year-old rancher named Lino Lopez became the first person in the United States confirmed to have died from Africanized bee stings. He'd been trying to clear a colony from the wall of a vacant ranch house 30 miles south of Rio Grande City, Texas, when the hive, later estimated at 40,000 to 60,000 bees, overwhelmed him. A pathologist who performed the autopsy told investigators he was 99% sure the stings were the cause of death. USDA lab testing on the recovered bees confirmed the aggressive strain. It had taken less than 3 years from the moment Africanized bees first crossed into Texas for that number to reach the first American name attached to it. It would not be the last. In April of 2008, in the remote northwestern corner of Okeechobee County, Florida, a 51-year-old construction worker named Robert Davis, known to everyone who knew him as Bobby, was leveling a trailer at an abandoned hunting camp when a swarm attacked him just before 11 in the morning. Bobby had discovered he was allergic to bee stings as a boy growing up in Fort Lauderdale and had avoided them his whole life as a result. It didn't matter. He was stung more than 100 times. Friends called 911 and met the ambulance halfway to town. Paramedics performed CPR the rest of the way to the hospital. He died the next day. Around 20 friends and family members, including his 3 children, camped at the hospital through the night before it was over. Investigators later confirmed, with high probability through genetic testing, that the hive responsible was Africanized. It was the first human death from these bees ever recorded in the state of Florida. It would not be the last, and it wasn't the first either. In Moody, Texas, a 62-year-old farmer named Larry Goodwin was driving his tractor across a neighbor's land when he disturbed a hidden hive later estimated at around 40,000 bees. He ran for a nearby house and grabbed a garden hose, trying to spray the swarm away. a response entomologists say does almost nothing against an Africanized colony already committed to defending itself. The bees overtook him before help could arrive. The pattern goes back further than most of these headlines suggest. In March of 2013, two Tampa Park rangers, David Zeladon and Rodney Pugh, were clearing debris near a picnic area when they flipped over an old tire with a front-end loader. As many as 100,000 bees poured out and swarmed directly into the cab of their vehicle. "It was like bees all in the cab," Pugh said afterward. Both men were hospitalized. Neither had done anything more unusual than move a piece of trash sitting in a public park. A few years later, in Central California, a 70-year-old man named Jack McBride was walking his dogs along a cornfield near his home when one of them poked its nose into what turned out to be a ground hive. McBride was stung more than 50 times, and so were his dogs. Stanislaus County's Agriculture Department confirmed the colony as Africanized. The first documented case, that far north in the state, evidenced the swarm's slow migration hadn't stopped, just gone quiet for a while. Since 1990, researchers tracking Africanized bee incidents have documented at least 17 confirmed U.S. fatalities outside Florida alone, along with an untold number of pet and livestock deaths that rarely make the news at all. Dogs stung to death in backyards in Texas, California, and Florida. Goats and horses killed after disturbing hives with mowers or farm equipment. In one recent stretch of just 3 months, reporting tracked a man who died mowing his own property. 3 tree trimmers hospitalized after cutting into a hidden colony. Hikers who had to run a full mile to outdistance an agitated hive. And 3 horses that died after a lawnmower startled bees into a defensive swarm that stung them thousands of times each. None of this requires an unusual amount of bad luck. It requires an engine, a blade, a vibration. The kind of ordinary noise a hive interprets, correctly or not, as an attack already underway. There's a reason lawn equipment shows up again and again in these stories, and it's not a coincidence. Entomologists studying colony defense triggers have found that the low-frequency vibration and engine noise from mowers, trimmers, and tractors closely mimics the signal bees associate with a large animal disturbing their nest. The exact threat response evolution built the colony to answer with overwhelming force. A hand pulling weeds near a hidden hive might get a handful of warning stings. A mower passing the same spot can read to the colony as the opening seconds of a serious attack and trigger the full defensive response instead. State agriculture departments in the affected regions now run active monitoring programs, specifically because of this. Florida's Phoebus system, Texas and California's own morphometric labs, testing suspicious colonies on a rolling basis, and by policy, destroying any confirmed Africanized hive found near homes, schools, or public land. It's a permanent, ongoing containment effort, not a one-time response to a scare that came and went. Nobody declares victory in this particular program because the range keeps being redrawn every few years, always in the same direction. There's a version of this story where the hybridization is simple. African genes made a bee more aggressive. End of explanation. Researchers who actually study the underlying biology describe something messier. The defensive behavior isn't a single gene switching on. It's a whole suite of traits, from how quickly a colony perceives a threat to how many workers it recruits to respond to it, all shifted at once by a genetic mixing event nobody planned or fully modeled in advance. Kerr's experiment was trying to solve a honey production problem. What actually got released into the wild was a behavioral profile nobody had tested for, because nobody had a reason to look for it until the queens were already gone. That uncertainty hasn't gone away. Researchers still don't have a confident answer for how far north the hybrid can ultimately establish itself. Cold winters are currently the main thing stopping Africanized colonies from pushing further than they already have. A hard freeze can wipe out a colony that European bees, bred over centuries for temperate climates, survive without much trouble. But that constraint is loosening. Every model built on rising winter temperatures shows the same basic shape. More of the country becomes survivable for this hybrid with each passing decade, not less. Here's the part that complicates the fear this video has been building, and it matters enough to say plainly, Africanized honeybees are not some invasive menace with no redeeming purpose. They're the same species beekeepers around the world depend on for honey production and crop pollination, genetically capable of everything a docile European colony does, just wired to respond to a threat with far less patience. Entomologists studying the hybrid have noted, somewhat uncomfortably, that eliminating Africanized bee populations entirely isn't a simple fix. In regions where they've displaced European colonies, they're often now doing the pollination work local agriculture has come to depend on. The animal responsible for the deaths in this video is, in every other context, doing exactly the job millions of managed honeybee colonies do every single day without incident. That's not a reason to relax around one. It's the reason nobody has been able to simply eliminate the problem and move on. Go back to the panic. The 90s specials, the tabloid headlines, the bee movie swarm supposedly crawling toward the border. The joke, if there ever really was one, was that the threat sounded too absurd to take seriously. A swarm of killer bees belonged in a made-for-TV movie, not a real news cycle. 36 years after the first colony crossed into Texas, the swarm is in at least 13 states, spreading north with the climate, indistinguishable by sight from the bees in your own garden, and responsible for names like Lino Lopez and Bobby Davis that never made it into the version of this story most people remember. Every one of them started the same ordinary way. A tractor, a lawnmower, a tire that needed moving, a dog that wandered a few feet too far. Nobody involved knew they'd crossed into range of something with a different threshold for what counts as a threat, because there was never anything to see. The hive looked exactly like every other hive. Somewhere in your own state, possibly your own county, that same ordinary hive is sitting in a wall, a tire, a hollow tree, indistinguishable from the harmless 1-2 properties over. The only difference between them is a genetic accident from 1957 that nobody has figured out how to fully undo, and the only warning you'll get is the sound your own lawnmower makes the moment it finds out which one you've got. The movie ended, the bees didn't.